Racist cop snaps little girl's arm. Her father's identity left everyone silent. She was just walking home after art class. No yelling, no running, just her backpack on one shoulder and her sketchbook tucked under her arm. She was 9. Her name was Zaya, and by the time she turned the corner on a Maple Avenue, her entire life was about to change. The man in the police car didn't ask where she was going. He told her to stop. He didn't ask if she was okay. He grabbed her wrist. And within 2 minutes, her bones were broken. Her sketchbook was in the street, and the man with the badge was already reaching for his cuffs. What he didn't know, Zaya had already hit the emergency shortcut her father taught her. She wasn't alone, and the woman on the other end of the line wasn't just family. She was fire. This is Cracks of Light, where true stories shine through the dark. If this moment already has your heart racing, make sure to subscribe. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, and you can help us reach more people who need stories like this. Zaya didn't understand why the cop slowed down. She wasn't even on the sidewalk. She was on the grass, avoiding a puddle, humming the last tune her art teacher had played in class. She noticed the cruiser before it stopped, black and white, engine low, windows up. Then the passenger side window slid down, and she heard a man's voice, flat, sharp, and cold. "Where's your ID?" She looked around, confused. "I'm 9, she said softly, pointing to her house just a block away. But that wasn't good enough. "Hand where I can see them," he barked. His name was Officer Travis Cordell. White, tall, sunglasses, even though the sun was already behind the trees. Zaya stayed still. She did what her dad had always told her. Keep calm, speak clear. But then he got out of the car. Boots slammed the pavement. "Don't get smart," he snapped. Then, without warning, he reached out and yanked her wrist. She screamed. The sketchbook fell. Her apple hit the curb and rolled into the street. She tried to twist away, tried to say something, anything, but the pressure on her arm turned from tight to unbearable. A loud, sickening crack followed. Her legs gave out. She hit the ground, gasping, sobbing. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. But he was already reaching for his cuffs like she was a threat. What he didn't see, what he would never have expected, was the tiny red light blinking from her phone screen in the grass. Zaya had followed every word Cassie ever drilled into her. "Press and hold. No talking. Just activate." And on the other end, Cassie's voice dropped into silence as she heard everything. The barked orders, the panic, the crack. And in less than 30 seconds, the woman who once trained FBI hostage teams was already in her car, phone to her ear, muttering the words that would set this story on fire. "You picked the wrong little girl." Cassie didn't waste a second. She didn't knock. She didn't hesitate. She stormed into Wilmington General's ER like she owned the floor. "Zaya James, 9 years old, arm injury," she told the nurse. "Room number." The nurse flinched at her tone, then pointed without a word. "Room 12." Cassie pushed the door open and saw the little girl, motionless, arms splinted, eyes swollen from crying. But what caught her attention wasn't the cast. It was the phone still clutched in Zaya's hand, screen locked in a 43-minute active call. Her own voice echoed faintly from the speakers. Zaya hadn't let go. Cassie took the phone gently, backed up the recording to the first 15 seconds, and hit play. Every sound came back. The bark of a man's voice, Zaya's soft replies, the snap. She didn't flinch. She memorized every second of it. Then she turned and left. Outside, she made 4 calls. First to internal review at the county precinct. Denied. No record of incident. No officer report. Second call to a nurse Cassie had trained with back in Quantico, now working with EMT intake. A little black girl brought in by patrol car, dropped and ditched. The nurse went silent. "Yeah," she finally said. "No name, no badge number. Just dumped." Cassie gritted her teeth. Third call. To a junior tech she once trained in federal digital forensics. "I need traffic dispatch logs for any patrol units within a 3-block radius of Franklin and Elm, timestamp between 2:40 and 2:55. 30 minutes later, a file came through. Patrol car 91C. No on-duty status. Stolen activation code. Unauthorized use. Cassie pulled up the precinct database. Cross-checked the car. Found the match. Officer Travis Cordell, age 38, 8 years in Wilmington PD, 3 citizen complaints for excessive force, 2 involving minors. All dismissed, all buried. No suspension, no media, no noise. Until now, Cassie didn't take it to the press. She didn't send it to Twitter. She printed every file, copied every audio file to a secure flash drive, and folded them into a plain black folder. No logos, no headlines, just truth. Then she grabbed her coat, her car keys, and the heavy silence of a woman who'd already seen too much and wasn't about to watch it happen again. Travis Cordell had no idea what was coming. But by nightfall, the woman who once trained counterterrorism units, who dismantled criminal networks, who specialized in neutralizing threats without drawing a drop of public attention, was already walking toward him. And she wasn't bringing mercy. She was bringing everything. Cassie didn't come to make a scene. She came to make it impossible for him to pretend it didn't happen. Benny's Diner sat off the main road. A tired little place with chrome stools and chip tables, the kind of spot where small-town cops like to sit with their backs to the wall and act like nothing ever touched them. Travis Cordell was no different. Every Sunday, same booth, same lunch special, same false confidence. Cassie parked across the street, watched him through the glass for 6 minutes. He laughed, barked something at the waitress, checked his phone like the world owed him a break. He didn't look behind him. He never did. When the bell over the door rang, Travis didn't even glance up. Cassie walked straight to his table. Calm, cold, controlled. She didn't sit. She didn't ask. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and hit play. Zaya's voice filled the diner. Please stop. That hurts. I didn't do anything. Then, snap. The room went silent. A fork clinked against a plate. A waitress froze mid-step. Travis's face drained. His mouth twitched, but no words came. Where did you get that? He said. Cassie didn't blink. You know who that girl is? She resisted. She's Zaya James, Cassie said. My niece. He went still. His jaw clenched. He tried to laugh, but it died in his throat. So what? You threatening me? If I were threatening you, you'd be on the ground, she replied. She leaned forward, dropped a napkin in front of him. On it, written in clean, even letters, Room 12, Wilmington General. 9 years old. Broken arm. Audio. Internal affairs. By the time my lawyer's done, you'll be lucky to keep your pension. Travis reached for the napkin, but she snatched it back before he touched it. You don't get to keep anything. Not the words. Not the moment. Not the control. That girl called me while you were hurting her. She had the clarity to press one button, and I had the clarity to record every second. I have timestamps, dispatch logs, EMT testimony. You were never on duty. You took the cruiser. You disappeared. You left a bleeding child in the street like she was trash. He opened his mouth, but she wasn't finished. Don't talk. Just listen. You don't know who I am, but you're about to. You're going to learn why my name has clearance levels. Why I train federal teams that don't even show up on maps. Why I didn't go to the media, because I'm not after a headline. I'm after a reckoning. A teenager near the counter had his phone out. Recording. Cassie didn't care. In fact, she welcomed it. Travis tried to stand up. You're done, he muttered, trying to fake some power, some control. Cassie didn't move. No, you are. She turned, walked out without another word. But the silence she left behind echoed louder than any scream. Travis sat frozen, face white, hands shaking. The people around him weren't looking away anymore. They were staring, judging. Recording point 10 minutes later, the video hit social media. No hashtags, no filters, just the raw audio of a little girl's cries, the sound of a grown man breaking a child's arm, and the voice of a woman who refused to let it be buried at BY nightfall. It had been shared 90,000 times that BY morning. The number tripled. And that's when it started, hashtag Justice for Zaya. It wasn't just a hashtag. It was a rallying point. Teachers posted photos of their students holding signs. Nurses wrote open letters. Parents uploaded videos saying they taught their kids to memorize emergency shortcuts too, just in case. News anchors said her name on live TV. Civil rights attorneys offered free counsel. Celebrities amplified the story. But it wasn't the fame that mattered. It was the shift. People weren't shocked anymore. They were furious. The story wasn't just about Zaya. It was about every black child ever told to be quiet, to not talk back, to obey, or else. And every or else just became real. Travis tried to scrub his online presence. Deleted Facebook, made his Instagram private. But it was too late. Photos surfaced of him from years past. Hands gripping arms too tightly, standing over boys on sidewalks, laughing in uniforms that no longer looked like protection. Inside the department, walls were tightening. Officers who once backed him started distancing themselves. Internal Affairs got a call from an anonymous source. Dispatch logs were leaked. A local journalist published a piece with the headline, "Wilmington Officer Under Scrutiny After Child Injury." They didn't name him, but everyone knew. Cassie didn't post anything. She didn't have to. She was moving in silence, but her silence had volume. She filed a formal complaint, sent copies to 4 oversight boards, and notified a U.S. Civil Rights Division contact. She knew the process. She knew the loopholes. And she knew how to close every one of them. The question wasn't whether Travis Cordell was going down. It was how hard he was going to fall. Because from the moment Zaya pressed that button, she hadn't been alone. And from the second Cassie walked into that diner, he hadn't been safe. Not from the law. Not from the truth. And definitely not from the woman who just turned his quiet Sunday lunch into a public reckoning. The video of the diner confrontation wasn't edited. It wasn't polished. It wasn't even labeled. But none of that mattered. By Monday morning, the clip had been reshared over 300,000 times. The audio alone was enough to freeze people in their tracks. A little girl crying, the sharp snap of bone, and a woman's voice, steady and cold, warning a police officer that he had picked the wrong child. Hashtags exploded overnight. Hashtag justice for Zaya. Hashtag no more silence. Hashtag hold the badge. It wasn't just an online thing anymore. Teachers were talking about it in class. Pastors were referencing it from pulpits. Protesters gathered on courthouse steps. It was in the streets now. By Tuesday afternoon, national media had picked up the story. Legal experts debated use of force on TV. Civil rights attorneys began filing Freedom of Information requests against Wilmington PD. Photos of Zaya's cast, covered in colorful notes and signatures from hospital staff and supporters, made the front pages. And then, at Newark International Airport, a plane landed. The man who stepped off it hadn't been back to the U.S. in 2 years. Nathaniel Gray, Zaya's father, an award-winning documentary filmmaker. Based in Berlin, former war correspondent, a man who had filmed war crimes and interviewed rebels. But nothing he had ever captured hurt more than the audio from a call his daughter made while her wrist was being crushed. Cassie met him at the hospital. They didn't hug. There was no catching up. Just a hospital room, a sleeping child, and a man who looked like he'd seen too many endings, but never expected to walk into one. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, it was low and clear. "Where is he?" Cassie handed him a folder. Name, badge number, prior complaints, patrol logs, known addresses. He scanned it silently and then said, "We don't need to find him. We need to find everyone who protects him." That night, 3 men in suits knocked on Cassie's door. No badge, no names, no warrant. "You need to come with us." She didn't resist, but she pressed record on her smartwatch before they touched the doorknob. They shoved her into the back of a black sedan, drove her around in circles for 40 minutes, and finally took her through a side entrance at a city government building. No charges, no explanation, just a cold metal room with a man in a wrinkled shirt and a barely visible badge saying she was interfering in a live investigation. Cassie stared him down. "I submitted everything through proper legal channels." He dropped a cease and desist on the table, filled with vague legal threats, obstruction, harassment, data misuse. She read every word, then tore it in half. "You think I'm scared of paper?" What they didn't expect was the neighbor across the street, an old man with shaky hands and a smartphone, filming the whole thing. He caught the license plate. The clip went online within the hour. Hashtag Where is Cassie started trending. By sunrise, protesters were outside City Hall. Nathaniel didn't give a speech. He didn't tweet. He printed a copy of Zaya's X-ray, walked to the center of the crowd, and laid it on the pavement. Then he stood beside it in silence. Reporters closed in. The image spread like fire. The mayor's office tried to spin it, called it a routine questioning. Lawyers fired back immediately. Civil rights organizations accused the city of retaliation. Law students volunteered pro bono. A retired federal judge called it abuse of power on national TV. Meanwhile, inside that room, Cassie paced. She didn't sit, didn't break, until the door opened again. This time, it was federal oversight agents. Suits sharp, IDs visible. "We're taking over," one said. The man who had questioned her stepped aside, silent, watchful. Cassie walked out of the room with her back straight and her wrists free. Outside, a crowd of nearly 600 stood waiting. Some held signs, others held hands. But when Cassie stepped into daylight, they erupted, not like a riot, not like a concert, like a promise, like a signal that she wasn't alone anymore. Nathaniel was there. They didn't say anything at first. Then she turned to him. "This isn't about one man," she said. "It's about the system that made him think this was okay." He didn't blink. "Then we burn it down. Together." That night, the focus shifted. It wasn't about Zaya's broken wrist anymore. It was about all the voices that had been silenced before hers. And the ones finally ready to speak. They didn't wait for permission. 2 nights after Cassie walked free, she and Nathaniel rented out a high school gym. No stage, no banners, just a microphone and folding chairs. The word went out fast. No RSVP, no press. Just show up if you've got something to say. By 7 p.m., there wasn't a seat left. By 7:30, people were standing along the walls. The first woman to speak was a retired teacher. She held up a photo of a former student who never made it to graduation. "They said he resisted," she whispered, "but I taught that boy. He was afraid of loud noises." Next came a father who hadn't seen his son in 8 years. A broken taillight turned into a broken spine. Then a nurse. Then a pastor. Then a former officer who took a deep breath and admitted, "I stayed quiet too long." For 3 hours, the room held silence and testimony in equal weight. Cassie didn't guide it. Nathaniel didn't narrate. They just listened. And when the final voice fell quiet, Cassie walked to the front and said, "This isn't just about Zaya. This is about every person in this room. We're not asking for justice anymore. We're building it." The next day, they launched Light, Legal Initiative for Genuine Human Truth. It wasn't flashy. No celebrity backing. No corporate funds. Just a digital platform, a secure server, and a team of believers. Within 72 hours, over 400 volunteers had signed on. Attorneys with backgrounds in civil rights, retired detectives tired of internal corruption, data analysts, reporters, even whistleblowers. The mission was simple: protect stories, preserve truth, pursue accountability. But it wasn't just words. Light opened an anonymous reporting portal. Anyone in the U.S. could upload documentation, video, testimony, scam letters, police reports. No name required. Just the truth. Submissions flooded in. Thousands by the end of the first week. A teenager from Mississippi uploaded dashcam footage of his brother being tackled without cause. A mother from Detroit posted screenshots of ignored complaints. A deputy sheriff from Nevada submitted a sealed memo from 2012. The stories weren't just similar, they were systemic. They followed the same patterns, the same tactics, the same silence. Nathaniel curated the first public report, pattern recognition, 40 states. 800 incidents. One system. It didn't name suspects. It named failures. Cassie began hosting weekly briefings. No filters. No apologies. Just facts and strategy. They weren't chasing media. Media chased them. The Light site went from a few hundred clicks to over 2 million views in under 10 days. But they kept the core message clear. This is not a crusade, it's infrastructure. We don't wait. We expose. We support. We act. And while Zaya healed, while her wrist slowly regained movement and her drawings filled page after page again, her voice stayed at the center. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, just present, just proof that one call, one act of defiance, one child refusing to stay silent, could crack the wall wide open for everyone else still waiting in the dark. The courthouse was packed before the doors even opened. No seats left, no standing room, just people shoulder to shoulder, waiting for something most had never seen before, a cop on trial. Not for corruption, not for procedural mistakes, but for breaking the body of a 9-year-old girl and walking away like it meant nothing. Travis Cordell sat at the defense table, thinner than before, hair cut short, suit too big. He didn't look up, not once. On the other side, Cassie sat with her arms crossed, Nathaniel beside her, unmoving. And between them sat Zaya, her arms still healing, her face calm, her eyes locked on the man who had once crushed her wrist and called it resisting. The prosecution didn't open with arguments. They opened with audio. The courtroom speakers played the call Zaya had made. Her voice echoed through the room, soft, scared, then panicked. The crack came next. Several people flinched. A juror covered her mouth. No one breathed. Then came the photos, x-rays, bruises, intake notes from the emergency room. Zaya's cast. The time-stamped footage. Her voice saying over and over, "I didn't do anything." One by one, witnesses took the stand. The EMT who found her crying on the curb. The nurse who first noticed she wouldn't let go of her phone. A tech expert who confirmed the audio's authenticity. A civilian who caught the patrol car on dashcam, idling where it shouldn't have been. And then, Zaya. She was led to the stand slowly, holding her mother's hand. The room went still. No cameras were allowed, but even without them, every eye memorized her. She sat down, straightened her shoulders. The attorney asked her to describe what happened. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. He asked for ID, she said. I said I didn't have any. I told him my name. I told him where I lived. I told him my dad's name. He laughed. Then he grabbed me. The attorney nodded. And what happened then? Zaya reached down and lifted a sheet of paper from her lap. A drawing. Crayon on sketch paper. A little girl standing with her arm in a sling, facing a giant shadow with a badge. Behind her, a crowd. Hands raised. Underneath, in simple block letters, "I'm not small anymore." The courtroom didn't move. No order was given, but the gallery stood. Silent. Unified. No cheers. Just respect. Travis Cordell didn't look at her. The defense tried. They claimed confusion, stress, misidentification. They brought in a psychologist who talked about fight-or-flight responses. But the jury didn't need theory. They had evidence. They had her voice. They had the aftermath. The closing statement from the prosecution was short. He saw a child, and he saw a threat. That should never be the same thing. 6 hours of deliberation. At 4:17 p.m., the four-person stood. On the count of aggravated assault on a minor, guilty. On the count of abuse of power, guilty. On the count of willful dereliction of duty, guilty. Travis didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't even blink. The judge revoked bail immediately. A deputy cuffed him at the table. He didn't resist. As he was let out, someone in the back whispered, "This time, you're not walking away." Outside, the crowd surged forward, not in chaos, but in quiet triumph. Zaya stepped down the stairs between Cassie and Nathaniel. People reached out, hands to touch her shoulder, to pass her notes, to say thank you. No chants, no protests, just a current of change moving through the street. It was the first time a cop in that district had ever been convicted for assaulting a civilian in uniform. The first time a courtroom had echoed with a child's voice and ended with justice. But Cassie knew it couldn't be the last. Zaya stood on the stage, not behind a podium, not under lights, just in front of Mike, in a school auditorium filled with families, kids, teachers, neighbors, and millions more watching from their phones. It was her first time speaking in public since it happened. She didn't read from paper. She didn't rehearse. She just looked straight ahead and said, "I was told to be quiet. I was told to listen. But I didn't deserve to be hurt just for existing. I didn't deserve pain just for being a kid." The room went still. No applause. No coughs. Just breath held in one long, collective pause. "I spoke," she said, and people listened. "So now I know I'm not alone. And I don't want any other kid to feel alone either." That moment streamed to over 10 million people in real time. It was shared, clipped, subtitled in 15 languages. Within a week, the Department of Justice launched a full-scale federal investigation into statewide complaint suppression. Several states were subpoenaed. Internal files cracked open. Quiet cover-ups didn't stay quiet anymore. Light expanded to 30 states. Mobile units formed, built with volunteer lawyers, trauma counselors, and digital archivists. Anonymous reports crossed 100,000. And they weren't just filing. Cases were being reopened. Officers suspended. Systems audited. Policies rewritten. People weren't just watching, they were acting. And through all of it, Zaya went back to school. No fanfare. No press. Just a new sketchbook in her backpack and a cast replaced by a brace. She didn't talk much in class, but she drew. Every day. And on one of those days, she brought something to Cassie. A drawing. A girl with a microphone standing in front of a crowd. The caption read, "Her voice is stronger." This story isn't just about what was broken. It's about who refused to stay broken. And if you're still watching, if this story stayed with you, then you're part of the reason it mattered. So let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Share what this meant to you. And if you believe voices like Zaya's deserve to be heard, don't just scroll. Subscribe. Join us. Because here on Cracks of Light, silence ends with us.